Good afternoon, everybody. So, this came up today on Facebook, and the meme is that Nick Shirley dug up that Bernie Sanders has $15 million in a Chinese bank account, and recently Ted Cruz, I think it was Ted Cruz, took him to task and claimed that he had millions of dollars, which Bernie Sanders obviously denied. Well, I wish I knew where it was, that kind of language and stuff. And I think it was Ted Cruz, or it was somebody in a Senate hearing. Anyway, so I had to ask the question, how many Democrats have these kind of accounts? How is this even possible? I started asking a lot of questions in my mind. And I posted this, reposted this with this text. Was Somalia the shell company to funnel cash to China in exchange for hundreds or thousands of fake photo ID drivers coming across the border in suitcases through Mexico? Of course, that's been all been outed. Okay, all this is public information, news reports. Did they use the same suitcases? I thought would be kind of ironic and hilarious if they just took the money out, use the same suitcase, put in the hundreds of thousands of fake IDs into those suitcases, then shipped them to Mexico and brought them across the border via vehicles, driving, shipping. Somalis caught taking cash in suitcases. That's outed. They were taking it. Maybe. Is there some kind of network? And I'm conjecturing. This is all conjecture, right? See comments below. I haven't put any comments in there because I was just doing a search, just using, the internet. And is this where Ilhan lost her millions to? Chinese bank accounts? Is this where they suddenly, all the money went to? Well, obviously, if they're taking it out in suitcases, there's money leaving and going somewhere, and somebody's not going to lose track of millions of dollars. I think it's something like $17 million or something was caught in one, in one exit from the country. I think it was $17 million, and Somalis were carrying in suitcases through security at the airport. And somebody's not going to lose track of all that money. So maybe maybe that was the only time. Maybe it wasn't. Okay. But then maybe ask the question. Now that we know that China has people in China had their fingerprints on the 2020 elections through the voting machines, through remote access. Now that all that's coming out, then I began to wonder, and we know Burisma was nothing but money laundering. So Hunter Biden, Burisma, Joe Biden selling influence. What happened to all that? We haven't heard about that for quite some time, but obviously there was some kind of network going on there, and China was involved with that too. Okay? And so since we know that from that, and since we know this from this, and now we know Bernie Sanders is alleged to, and Ilhan Omar, this is a fact that there was an accounting mistake that somehow, messed up $24 million or something like that of wealth, on her accounting receipts. Oh, there was an accounting error. Well, somebody didn't want anybody else to find out that they used a winery as a shell company to launder money to Ilhan Omar for something. So, now there's all these open-ended questions. How, why, when, where, all the 5 questions. Who? So I just started asking questions. Does China have banking in Somalia? No, China does not have physical Chinese commercial bank branches operating inside Somalia. All right, well, this is going to be quite kind of long, so stick with me because I asked multiple questions, got lots of answers, and there's quite a bit of history here. And Ilhan Omar, it is known that her father came to the U.S. as a taxi driver. He was a colonel in the military in Somalia. Okay? So you got to understand that history in order to get to the answer. Does China have banking in Somalia? Well, yes and no. Kind of is the answer. However, if we look here, financial trade, let's just let the internet, okay, pull it out. All right, I just asked questions, and this is what happened. I'm going to share my little rabbit hole here with you. They don't have physical banks. Financial trade relation, bilateral trade, engage in heavy import-export trade. Wow, well, they do, huh? Okay. And China has offered zero tariff treatment. Wow. For Somali exports. Well, what the heck do they export? Well, you're going to find out in a second that human trafficking is involved. As we get farther deeper into this rabbit hole, we get down to it. You have to, it's, to find real information on the internet, internet is full of disinformation and misinformation. And everybody knows this, okay? But there's a reason why it's full of that. It's so you can't discern what is truth. And you have to be very good at asking questions. And the research background that I have, in the doctoral work, hard sciences, and soft sciences, combined research like that. You have to be able to ask the right questions. You have to know and learn how to ask the right questions in order to find the information you want. And I'm not saying that you should say, ask leading questions. They have to be open-ended. Just like the question I asked, does China have banking in Somalia? I mean, how do we know or find out that Bernie Sanders and if any other Congress people have these undisclosed Chinese bank accounts? How are you going to find that? I mean, there's no paper trail, obviously. They're going to cover that up. If the allegation is true, and I'm not saying it is true. That's why it's an open-ended question. You can't bias your result with what you want to hear. And so that's why these questions are asked the way they're asked, okay? It's completely exploratory. Financial trade relations. So there's economic cooperation. There's zero tariff treatment for Somali exports. Well, they get imports through suitcases by the millions of dollars, okay? And all of that money that's being exported in suitcases by Somalis is part of the feed your family or whatever, feed the world fraud or whatever is going on up there. I forget what the name of it is. There's multiple. There's healthcare fraud. There's daycare fraud. And then there's the PPE funds from COVID fraud. And all of that is combined and leaving... it's paying for people to exist here in the United States, but it's also to live a very good life, rich, wealthy life here in the United States. But then it's also leaving in suitcases by the millions. And it's all tied back to, most recently, James Comer at least, it's all tied back to Ilhan Omar. News has already come out about that stuff. How she okayed it, and the governor of the state, and the attorney general of the state. They're all involved. And somehow turning a blind eye to it. And all these witness testimonies and everything have come out, Senate committee hearings and stuff. It's all come out. If you watch the Senate committee hearings over the past 2 years, you know this. If you haven't, then you're going to be delusional because you're going to get some kind of disinformation and total lies. You have to watch the Senate committee hearings. For yourself. You have to do it for yourself. You can't rely on somebody else any longer in this age, the AI age that we're in. So, okay, anyway, so there's economic cooperation, trade partnerships, institutional banking present. Okay, what's that say? While Somalia has discussed expanding financial technology investment trade partnerships with China, the institutional banking presence from Chinese financial institutions remains absent in the country. That doesn't mean in the region. Okay, just inside Somalia. Okay, so now it brings back these triggered my memory about what happened in the 90s um, with Bill Clinton, under Bill Clinton, and well, it's sort of Bill Clinton, George Bush, transfer of power, and Mogadishu and Somalia. I mean, how did they become? How did Ilhan Omar and her father become refugees? Okay, that's the first question. They were refugees. That is well known. Okay, so how did they come to the United States? What happened during that time period that brought them to the United States? Okay, well, we got to go back. You got to go back in history a little bit. In order to answer the question of does China have banking in Somalia, you got to kind of go back in history. All right. So, I mean, we know that there is trade. We know that they have zero tariffs. You want to know why there's inflation in the United States? Because, well, China is giving zero tariffs to everybody else. And who's funding those zero tariffs and all those really cheap products that communism creates via the labor in China for U.S. companies to sell here in the United States? Well, that's why you have inflation. Who funds all that communism that allows that to exist? Well, the United States did and has. Free trade agreements. Okay? That's why having tariffs and not having tariffs is because U.S. props up 90% of the world. Your money, your labor, and your dollars props up 90% of the world's economy. I don't know, maybe more. But because we purchase it all. We purchase it all here in the United States. And it goes to China. And so anyway, I'm kind of going off track here. So I'm going to stop with that. But it's just a conjecture. Again, that's just a conjecture. But if our dollars are keeping the price of goods low because we purchase it and they're using communism as an economic model to suppress wages so that those products can stay low, and they're subsidizing it through taxation of their people, and then they're offering zero tariffs for Somali exports, that means that that's one of their best trade partners. Well, what's leaving Somalia that's so valuable to China that they would offer them zero tariffs treatment? That's another question, but that's for another day because that's not part of this. But we got to go back in history a little bit. What happened? What did I touch? Oh my gosh. I about had a heart attack because there's so much information here. Oh my God. Okay, so was U.S. involved in... Now, I already looked at all these links. Somalia is pursuing... Okay. Trump tightens U.S. policy. I can't go to those links because I don't want to lose this conversation. The rise of Somalia pushes for new... I can only scan these. I wish I could go to these links. New horizons for trade. China is ready to offer 100% zero tariff. Okay, so that's where I got all of these things. Regulatory role of Central Bank of Somalia. All right. Ooh, I didn't know that was there. Ooh, I would really like to find out about this Central Bank of Somalia. Ooh, dang. Okay, no wonder the Somalia banking system till today is shunned by... Oh, wow. Would love to... Okay, look it up. Look it up on your... The regulatory... There's the title. Look it up. All right. But my next question became... Because you had to go back... you need to know the roots of where all this Somalia stuff come from. Like the refugee status and everything. Okay, so you got to go back in history a little bit. How did people become refugees from Somalia? All right, was the U.S. CIA involved in Mogadishu during the year the movie Black Hawk Down depicts? Yes. Okay, so I kind of knew that already, but I wanted to, get the internet to confirm it. This is AI mode. Gemini, Google Gemini. Yes, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency was heavily involved in Mogadishu during 1993, the year depicted in Black Hawk Down. The role of CIA, the hunt for Adid. Okay, this is all kind of in the movie, so I'm not going to spin Mohammed Farah Adid and top leadership. Well, who was his top leadership? Okay, well, anyway, we're not going to get into that. Human intelligence, warlord Pasha, the key codename Pasha, setting up the raid, ground support. All right, so that was all about Adid. All right, well, what preceded that? Who did the CIA install? All right, well, we have a habit of installing leaders in countries where we intervene. All right. And typically we intervene based on humanitarian crises. Okay, I'm not saying that what the U.S. does is illegal or illegal or acceptable or unacceptable. There's always two parties. There's the victims and there's the offenders, the perpetrators. And the perpetrators are called the victims the perpetrators, and the victims are called the perpetrators. And nobody's going to know who's doing what, because you can watch any crime video on YouTube and the person who did the crime is always going to say, I didn't do anything, and they're the ones who caused me to do whatever I did. And then the person who called the police and going to say, no, he stole this, and it's going to be he said, she said, until an investigation happens and until somebody judges. All right, until you intervene with a judge, a third party, and they make a judgment on who did what. So, who did the CIA install? So we kind of do the same thing. If there's a humanitarian crisis going on somewhere in some country like Somalia, then the US and the UN and everybody's going to try to step in to protect human life. And that's the core mission, okay? Now, can that be used corruptly? Of course it could be. I'm not saying it is, or it has been, or it ever will be. I'm just saying that those are facts. Yes, it can be used corruptly. Yes, it can be used as its mission, goals, values are intended, okay? As humanitarian aid. Yeah, 100%. Who did the CIA install as president of Somalia? But we know that they've installed presidents and leaders and stuff after these sort of interventions go on. All right. So this isn't like me saying, oh, we're a corrupt country and all that. Yes, there are people who are going to say it's corrupt because people don't want accountability. And all those people who are overthrown because they've been corrupt and actually caused humanitarian crisis, well, they're going to say that the U.S. has got corrupt, and then all that news is going to go around the world and blah, 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 blah. Well, they're what are we called? Not warlords. Anyway, I'm kind of going off the edge there, but let's just get back. Okay, CIA install. Yeah, somebody's gonna say it's negative. Somebody's gonna say it's positive. I think you get what I'm saying. And you're never going to know who's right or wrong. I mean, you got to do actually your own research. Okay, so that's what we're doing. CIA installed as president of Somalia afterward in those years and did USAID money. This is the kicker right here. I couldn't believe what came up after this. You're gonna be floored. All right. I don't know if it's this response or the next one, but did USAID money fund the efforts there? Who was the American president at the time? Who was American president? Bill Clinton was the American president during the events of Black Hawk Down in the years that followed the original humanitarian intervention, Operation Restore Hope. Whose more recent presidential campaign was based on hope for America? Wasn't that Barack Obama? Isn't that interesting? Operation Restore Hope. When I get down a little bit lower, I'm gonna say that the CIA was aiding and abetting a Marxist-Lenin government, socialist government in Somalia. And they were there for humanitarian aid, okay? And to stop, I mean, the utter... But I'm just gonna say that there's also other implications to all of this in intervention, okay? And that's where I'm gonna leave that. All right, and you can figure it out as you go along. Operation Restore Hope, and it's funny that Obama was definitely a socialist and a Muslim. Um, that's definitely who Obama was. Okay, I don't know so much about a avowed Muslim, but I'm pretty sure he came from Muslim heritage or something. I'm not sure, but somehow linked to Africa, something. It's just funny that Operation Restore Hope then became basically the platform for Obama to run for president later on, right? Who became president after Bill Clinton? So, anyway, moving on here. Was initiated by outgoing President George H.W. Bush in December 1992, but Bill Clinton inherited the mission when he took office in 93. Following the disastrous Battle of Mogadishu, that's Black Hawk Down, Clinton ordered the complete withdrawal of all U.S. forces, that's the military, from Somalia, which was finalized by March 1994. Who did CIA install as president? The CIA did not install a president of Somalia during those years. Instead, the United States, they supported an interim government led by Ali Mahdi Mohammed. A wealthy hotelier, Ali Mahdi, was named interim president by... Now, in this dialogue with AI, Google AI, I didn't explore this Ali Mahdi, okay? It's interesting that, and it is abroad like this. It is like this, okay? The children have so many. Anyway, I'm not going to go there either. I'm not going to go on that side. If you want to look up Al Mahdi, it would be very interesting if you went on a tangent. You left something in the comments below about Ali Mahdi. Okay, international conference in Djibouti, and willing to cooperate with UN, allow humanitarian aid into the country. So USAID aid kept going into the country. Okay, money kept going into the country. However, calling him installed implies he had real power, which he didn't have real power. Okay, so they propped him up, but he didn't have real power. Okay, his presidency was heavily contested by his chief rival, General Mohammed Farah Aidid. Supposedly would have been related to the Aidid they tried to oust. Okay, Black Hawk Down, Mogadishu. This rival split Mogadishu in half, triggered by a catastrophic civil war, and plunged the country into total anarchy. When the U.S. military pulled out in 1994, the U.S. is essentially abandoned nation-building efforts altogether. Well, there you go. Okay, so that's why I asked my question at the top. Somalia was left without a functioning central government for the remainder of the 90s. Note, years later, in mid-2000s, CIA did secretly funnel millions of dollars to various Somali warlords to fight rising Islamist groups. We did the same thing in Iran-Contra. The Iran-Iraq War. This is, if you don't know, this is how Osama bin Laden became Osama bin Laden, because we trained him. The CIA trained Osama bin Laden and his group to fight against certain people that America was not aligned with or didn't align with Mideast policy or whatever back then. Okay, that's a long time ago. That's before I was born, basically, but that's everybody knows. I mean, you should know that history. That's history. That's not conspiracy. Secretly funneled millions of dollars to various Somali warlords to fight rising Islamist groups, but this occurred long after the Black Hawk Down era. Okay, so money was funneled to Islamist groups to fight Islamist groups. Okay, that's Le Monde Diplomat, maybe that's French, I don't know. But anyway, there's the source. Did USAID money fund these efforts? No, USAID funds were not used for political... Now, this is what's interesting here. were not used for political engineering, covert operation, or financing warlords. By law, okay, so that was other cash, apparently, because it says here, years later, the CIA did secretly funnel money. Well, what money, where did that money come from? Well, it has to come from the U.S. taxpayer. Didn't it come from, but okay, NGOs, there's the magic, there's the secret sauce. But, and think, Trump and the Republicans they immediately shut down USAID, so many billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm not sure what the total was, but I could be exaggerating on billions. But at least hundreds of millions of dollars of USAID money. Okay. Now, no USAID covert blah, blah, blah. Funds can only be allocated for humanitarian relief and development, not covert CI military actions. Okay, well, they must have their own vaults. During those years, and maybe they, it's commandeered, during missions. I don't know. Who knows? During those years, USAID money was directed toward famine relief, logistical support, medical aid, all that kind of stuff, logistical support, supporting non-governmental organizations and UN agencies working on the ground to distribute aid. Okay. So who are these NGOs? Well, you know what? I bet if we got a list of those NGOs, and I didn't ask that question because I was going down a different track, but I bet that would be an interesting list if it's available somewhere to find out who those NGOs were and who those UN agencies were and who was heading those UN agencies and NGOs. But anyway, moving on, while the U.S. government spent billions in Somalia during this era, the money was strictly segregated. USAID handled the public humanitarian response. The Pentagon financed the military peacekeepers. Well, the Pentagon financed it. Okay, well, but money goes from the U.S. taxpayer to the Pentagon. And the CIA used its own classified covert budget, black budget, to pay local informants and run tracking operations. All right, so, and, there's the sources that AI used to summarize all that information, which is very telling. Now, here's the kicker, okay? And you can see it highlighted right there. I asked, all right, well, how many years did USA, because Trump and the Republicans shut it down in 2020, and the first thing they did in 2025, right? When they got into office. So USAID humanitarian aid flowed because Republicans had already outed all this information under the Biden era, and everybody tried to shut it down as conspiracy theory, and Comer didn't know what he was doing and all this kind of stuff, and blah, blah, blah. We know now that he did know what he was doing, and it was all truth. It was all fact. It's all fact-based, okay? So many committee hearings have proven it. I mean, okay, to say proven it, but by testimony has supported it. Let's say that. Let me say that, all right? Everybody's like, oh, you can't prove it. Well, technically, you can't prove anything. Technically, you don't prove anything unless there's an actual video recording observing the transaction. You can't prove anything. Okay? You can only imply it, suggest it, offer evidence up for it. And that's scientific research. You don't ever prove anything in scientific research. I mean, and that's all I'm going to say. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Now, USAID for 31 years. Watch this. Look at that. 31-year continuous flow, 1994 to 2025, when Republican Congress shut it down. After the fiscal US Embassy and USAID office closed in Mogadishu, USAID shifted its operations to Nairobi, Kenya. Now, where is that? Didn't Obama's dad and family or uncles or something come from Kenya? Is it that interesting? Wow. Earlier, before I started making this video, and I read through all this stuff and decided to make this video. I didn't even realize that. I skimmed over that. They shifted operations to Nairobi, Kenya. That's very interesting that Obama supposedly came from Kenya. Maybe that was code. He's actually born in Hawaii, right? He's born in Hawaii to a single mother and a black father, I thought, who was a pornographer, right? Isn't that his history? I'm not sure what the link to Kenya was, but his brother family or something is from Kenya. I don't know. I'm really kind of fuzzy about it. Maybe you can get me up to speed in the comments. But 100% know he's linked to Kenya somehow. Pretty sure that was the country that his brother and family and stuff, and I don't know, they said they didn't know him or he's not real or something like that. I don't know. Who knows? It's funny how USAID money is involved. And we all felt like his birth certificate was fake. Michelle Obama is actually, supposedly Joan Rivers outed Michelle Obama as being Michael Obama, or Michael somebody, and is actually a trans man and not even a real woman, and their children are fake. There's all these kind of things out there. And now that this says shifted operations to Kenya, well, why? Why did they shift operation to Kenya? They created a civil war in Mogadishu, cost the lives of U.S. soldiers, and then pulled out. They were done there. But then it says even the USAID offices closed, and then shifted operations to Kenya. Well, what were they doing in Kenya? That's where Obama is supposedly from. That's very interesting. Anyway, from there, it safely managed and funneled hundreds of millions of dollars annually into Somalia. I mean, all those things, that's PubMed Central, so there you go. That's a pretty legit source. Can't argue with that. It's not conspiracy theory. Independent framework. While U.S. government can please stop direct assistance to Somali military or state institutions, continue funding non-governmental organizations, NGOs. And wasn't this what came out when they started doing the Doge went in and started doing this auditing of USAID and ended up shutting it 95% of it down or something like that? Because we were funding NGOs, and those NGOs were doing weird stuff. All right, all of that came out in 2025. Scale of aid. The U.S. consistently remained the single largest humanitarian donor to the country. For context, $2.3 billion in 2022 and 2024 alone. What the H? To avert mass starvations, combat drought, and manage immense internal displacement camps. Well, I wonder if that involves human trafficking, those displacement camps. Who knows? I'm not saying USAID was involved in human trafficking. I'm not saying that at all. But we know that China has been. I mean, that's been outed over the past few years. And across the border, as a matter of fact. Into this country, as a matter of fact. Man. Why 2022 and 2024 alone? 2022 was supposedly the red wave of America, when Republicans were going to take over because Joe Biden was such an nincompoop and mentally incapacitated. And 2024 was the election year for Kamala Harris, who was installed to replace Joe Biden. She wasn't elected. She was installed to replace Joe Biden. Of course, she was the vice president at the time, And so that kind of tells you, I mean, just government working the way the government works. The vice president replaces the president when he is incapable of continuing. And so basically, the fact that she wasn't elected by the party means that she took over for a completely incapable sitting president. But they didn't say that. It just happened. So there's something funny going on there. USAID right there. 2022 and 2024. That's not a coincidence. $2.3 billion to Somalia to avert mass. I'm going to tell you, there are a lot of people in Somalia. Does it take $2.3 billion? We basically prop up Israel with $3 billion a year. The whole country. We sustain Israel as a country. And for good reason. I'm not saying anything bad about that. I'm just saying that $2.3 billion to Somalia. I don't know. That's kind of fishy to me. In those two, 22 and 2024 alone, just those between those 2 years that were so critical for Democrats to hold on to power illegitimately. We know now that it was illegitimate and fraught, widespread election fraud going on. Okay. And they didn't want, this was to suppress news and information and investigations that the Republicans in the House and Senate were doing. Okay. These Senate committee hearings, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of, it's hard because we are flooded with information, but that's very fishy right there. I don't know. Maybe, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. Show me in the comments how $2.3 billion was spent only on those items. Without any money going missing, because $1 trillion went missing from the Pentagon budget. Was it $1 or $2 trillion? Maybe even $2 trillion just went missing out of the Pentagon budget during the Biden years. Or maybe it's the Obama years. I'm not 100% certain. But when the aid stopped, 2025 dismantling, decades long, dismantle the policy effective. Trump administration issued executive order in 2025, policy extensive funding pipelines to multiple international destinations. The fallout, sudden freeze, immediately canceled $125 million in funding for 2025. Unprecedented aid, void, more blah, blah, blah. 60% of active NGOs, more than 60% of active NGOs operating inside Somalia relied on USAID as the primary donor. Oh, wow. Okay. Well, why were they there? Why do we still have 40% there? It's abrupt halt, forced closure. Blah, 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 blah. Well, current status. While U.S. continues targeted military drone and ground counterterrorism operations against al-Shabaab, large-scale civic community funding from Washington has been aggressively scaled back or eliminated under overarching mandate to cancel aid deemed wasteful or misaligned with domestic American interests. So, okay, there you go. So there was something going on. All right, and so there's the sources, jcs.mil, PubMed. I mean, these are legitimate sources. Sidra Institute, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. Stimson Center, U.S. Department of State. I mean, these are CGTN Africa. That's an aid group, I believe. But, all of these are defense priorities, history online. Okay, a lot of legitimate sources there. All right, so was any of these funds connected somehow to Chinese influence in Somalia? Okay. So now we're trying to get back to the original question. All right, and what news recently came out was that there was remote hacking from China. I don't know. Somehow China was involved in remote hacking 2020 election. This news came out not too long ago. All right, and I think it was in a Senate committee hearing, and then there was I don't know, maybe Benny Johnson or some other source of information that reported it. Okay, but so is it leaked to Al Shabaab? I mean, up there it says it is. All right, against Al Shabaab. Well, was any of it linked prior to? Did we create Al Shabaab? Did we fund these Islamist group? Was Al Shabaab an Islamist group before, just a small group like Osama bin Laden, before we started funding them? And is all that connected, right? So to overthrow and cause that civil war, to overthrow a very dark period in Mogadishu and Somalia before the civil war. All right, connection between, my apologies, let me address both your questions clearly. Okay, connection between USAID, no, historical USAID funds were never connected to Chinese influence in Somalia. So none of this humanitarian aid, according to AI mode, was connected to such influence in Somalia. Okay, because the only reason is because we'll get to it in a second. All right, there's a reason why I asked it, and that will come out in a second. I'm not going to jump ahead. All right, USAID, an independent agency of the United States government, is funded in Somalia, has historically been distributed strictly through vetted international entities. Now, of course, all this is going to be the cursory search that AI gets from the web, because you can't actually just have this. The cursory search is the most surface level search, okay? And on the most surface level, of course, every Democrat in Congress says that they do everything legitimately. Although they are now, like Ilhan Omar, tied, and the governor of California, Newsom's tied to all kinds of stuff, and the Higginberger, or whatever the Virginia governor is, the New Jersey governor is caught in a big fat lie about how many illegals are actually voting, and it's very, very widespread. So they all feign legitimacy on the surface. Of course, Tim Walz, we've never done anything, and none of that's going on in Minnesota, and blah blah blah, and of course, he's the stolen valor dude. So, he's going to stay on the surface because he lied to people about his record. And then he claimed he didn't lie, and then he claimed there's no fraud or anything going on in Minnesota. And then he had to come to terms, and he's like, oh no, we're going to stand up for our citizens, even though they're not actual citizens. What he meant was he's going to fight ICE, and he's going to start a war with ICE in his own state. But then he had to cower down and apologize in order to maintain power. And try to seem legitimate, and he's helping ICE and so forth and so on, helping but not helping. It's all a lie on the surface. The surface is a lie. Don't read a book by its cover. Is that how that goes? But don't judge a book by its cover, right? That's why you got to watch all these Senate committee hearings. This is why so many people are in the dark and they believe so many lies and delusions, because they don't watch stuff for themselves. Maybe they don't have time. Maybe they don't have the intelligence level. Maybe they don't have maybe they have too much cognitive dissonance. I don't know. They believe delusions, and then when they hear the truth, it causes pain and suffering. That's what cognitive dissonance is. Because the thing they believed in is a lie, and they don't want to have to admit that it's a lie, because it causes them to feel things about themselves they don't want to feel. That they were lied to. They believed a lie. That's hurtful internally to your own ego, right? That's what cognitive dissonance is all about. Anyway, the distribution of the funds were routed through United Nations agencies like World Food Program. Kind of like they did in the United States, in Minnesota. Isn't that interesting that food programs are the distribution channels for corruption? What the heck, bro? Western non-governmental organizations, that word just keeps coming up, doesn't it? and Doge found out that these kind of NGOs were acting adversely to actual American interests. All right, they were doing things corruptly. The oversight. Every dollar was strictly audited. Okay. Yeah, I had a big problem with that when I first read it. It was strictly audited by U.S. federal, under U.S. federal, specifically designed to prevent, blah, blah, blah. Of course it is. You know, there's a lot of laws in this country that are designed to prevent crime from happening, but crime happens. Okay? I mean, let's be real. AI has a problem being real. It can only do and respond based on information it collects, and the information it collects is not depth, right? There's no depth of knowledge. It's all cursory surface, what it can collect within a few seconds to provide a very fast response. Okay, so take it with a grain of salt. Anything you ever get from AI, do your own research. That's why I keep asking these questions, to dig. And at the end of this, you're going to find out I kept hitting a brick wall. And you're going to see how interesting that is, okay, in a second. But that's the real kicker. You're going to find out in a second how much they control the flow of information, even with AI. Is Ilhan Omar or her family linked to Adid or Al-Shabaab? No, there's no factual. Now we're getting back to the history, right? Well, how's Ilhan Omar? And then we're going to get to Bernie Sanders in a second. Back to that question about Chinese banks. Are Chinese banks operating in Somalia? So that would USAID that got shut down, is that how money got funneled through this cash leaving Minnesota, millions of dollars leaving Minnesota, get stuck into an account that Bernie Sanders wouldn't have to report? And then he could say on his tax forms, oh, I reported everything. And then he could plausible deniability. Oh, I don't know anything about that. You don't have to report, even though it's there. Is it in some kind of account like that in another country that goes unreported in the United States to the IRS? Well, that's kind of what I was leading it to. Is there banks in Chinese banks? Because if it's a Chinese account and it's a legitimate allegation, then it's got to be there somewhere. All those millions of dollars, nobody's going to let that just leave in suitcases untracked. Somebody, that money is attached to somebody. Okay? That's a lot of money. Is Ilhan Omar and her family linked to Adid? Okay, so now what happened? How did they become refugees in the United States? This is where we got to get to next. That's the next link in the bridge, okay? Link in the chain, bridge. No, there's no factual historical evidence. Lincoln, but wait. Now, don't take it on the surface. The timeline, you got to read. Timeline of her family's life in Somalia makes any connection to these entities impossible. In fact, okay, but does it really AI? Okay, we're going to find out. You're going to find out in a second. See, this is what I mean about, you have to know how to ask the right questions. You have to know how to read information. You have to know how to parse, chunk, all that kind of stuff, exactly like AI does when it absorbs information, okay? In fact, her family was on the opposing side of the political conflicts that tore the country apart. Interesting. So the Civil War happened because of insurgents or whatever you want to call them. And the U.S. was there to basically, in Mogadishu, you correct me if I'm wrong, to use Islamist groups against regimes that were in power, or they were there to stop the revolution of certain Islamist groups from overtaking the existing government. So if her family was in fact on the opposing side of political conflicts that tore the country apart, well, then they were the ones in power. Al-Shabaab was founded in the mid-2000s, and Ilhan Omar and her family fled Somalia as refugees in 1991, which is a young child. Okay, so they weren't even there for Al-Shabaab. General Adid. Omar's family had no alliance with Adid. Adid was a rebel. There you go. He was the rebel commander. And So that made me think when I read that, well, why was there a rebellion? What were they rebelling against? Obviously, that's the next question, okay? We have DSA in America rebelling against freedom in America. They want communism in America. I mean, a bunch of idiots, right? They want all this kind of crap here in America. They are actually creating the same crap that went on in Mogadishu to destroy and rend Somalia and turn it over into complete anarchy. They're doing it here in the United States, but who's funding it? You know, it used to be USAID through NGOs. It probably still is. So anyway, they were aligned with the family in power, okay? And Adid, who the U.S. military in 1993 under Clinton and Bush, changeover, the military force there was there to kill Adid, the rebels. It was chaos of civil war and rise of various named factions, including Adid's, that forced Omar's family to flee their home and seek refuge in a camp in Kenya. What the? Holy crap. So they were aligned with the government that was in power. Clinton, Democrat, withdrew. The government that was in power, a military U.S., withdrew all U.S. military and stuff. The government went through a civil war. I'm trying to get all this aligned in my head, like ducks in a row. Black Hawk Down occurs. Clinton pulls everybody out. And all these people went to Kenya. And the USAID money, they went with the USAID money to Kenya, apparently, according to this. AI is not going to tell you all that. You have to link everything together. You have to put it together. It's like Legos. Wow. And Kenya is where Obama came from, supposedly. And that's where all the USAID funding went. Wow. Who was the president after Bill Clinton? Wow. Wow, bro. Her father's true historical background. Okay. While her family had no ties to warlords or terror groups, okay, so who are the terror groups? The rebels. They're the terror groups, okay? Her family was in power, so they weren't the terror groups. However, you're going to find out in a second why, because that's my next question in this chain. Well, why were they rebelling against the leaders who her people were aligned with? Her late father, Nur Omar Mohammed, was a public figure in pre-Civil War Somalia. He served as a high-ranking military colonel and government education official. So he was very good at education, huh? Okay. Military colonel and government education official under the regime of dictator. He was a colonel of a dictator. Like Syed Barre. I don't know how to say that, but because Syed Barre's regime committed severe human rights abuses and atrocities in the late 80s, her father's position in that government has drawn political scrutiny. However, see, I didn't know any of this. But this is unveiling, this is clearing some smoke out, right? Wait till I ask this next question. Hang on. Okay, because watch the next question. I know this is long, and we're already at 54 minutes, but this gets better, okay? If you've waited this long, you're in for some real treasure, all right? About who, why, when, Ilhan Omar. And eventually, these Bernie Sanders Chinese bank account, okay? I'm telling you, stick around. Hold up. Because Syed Barr's regime committed severe human rights abuses and atrocities in the late 1980s, her father's position in that government has drawn political scrutiny. However, historical military records have never shown any personal involvement by her father in war crimes. Well, they're not war crimes, right? If you're in power. How can they be classified a war crime if you're in power? Okay. And you're resisting a rebellion. Titles matter. How history is written. So, nor any connection to the insurgent groups like Adid's that later overthrew that government. Okay, so if I'd like to blah, 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 Saxafi, I don't know what that is. Ithi, don't know. The Guardian, Encyclopedia Britannica, Pioneer Press, Black Past, don't know what that is. Sounds like a House.gov, Black Caucus Statement on, okay, so that's what Black Past is, okay. It's related to that kind of crap. Congressman, what I mean by crap is it's propaganda. All right, it's whitewashing. Okay, it's blackwashing. It's colored washing. Whatever you want to say, but the term is whitewashing people's past, making them clean. Okay. Business Insider, Reuters, Somaliland Chronicle. Okay, Somaliland broke off from Somalia, I think, right? So after the Civil War, but Sahan Journal. All right. So some of those sources seem legitimate. They're legitimate media. Okay. So then I asked, so it's no stretch of the imagination that as colonel under Syed Barr command, Ilhan Omar's father carried out those atrocities that led to so much starvation and humanitarian crises. Okay, well, if you're getting starved to death, you're going to become a rebel. I mean, right? You're trying to survive, okay? Yes, it is entirely logical to conclude that as a high-ranking colonel in that military, he was part of the state apparatus that executed those brutal campaigns. Now we're starting to get a clear picture of her history. That's not whitewashed by all this other BS media, all right? And glorifying her. And we know that she's tied. We know they're going to be tied. And that's no stretch of the imagination either. If they left and USAID left and NGOs left and the US military left and everybody went to Kenya, it's no stretch of the imagination that Barr and Muhammad, her father, Nur Omar, is that his name? Did I say that right? Nur Omar, yeah. Went to Kenya, and all the money went to Kenya, and then all that they became refugees, quote unquote refugees, to have a special status so they could be immigrated to the United States. Looks like that there's wow, and Obama. Wow, looks like there's something there. And this is based on legitimate sources, so it's not a conspiracy theory, right? But definitely raises eyebrows, right? I mean, if your eyebrow's not raised, then you got some disconnect in your brain. Your neurons aren't connecting correctly and firing right. That's all there is to it. If you can't see this connection. So he was tasked as a colonel to carry out these atrocities to cause humanitarian crisis. The role of a colonel and of course, if you're well loved, as Ilhan Omar has said publicly about her father, he was well loved. Well, if he's well loved for carrying out humanitarian crisis and murdering people and starving them to death, and that says a lot, for a dictator, on behalf of a dictator. If he's well loved by the people in power and aligned with that, yikes. And she's the daughter of that, who loves and looks up to her father and hates America and everything America is and wants to steal from Americans and wants to crush America and change it into something else. Again, these are things she said openly because she's aligned with and loves her father. And of course, you're going to love your father. I don't care what kind of tyrant it is. That's just biological, okay? It fed her. It gave her life. It's going to be very hard. Train a child up in the way they go and they will not depart from it. That's Proverbs. That's right out of the Bible. And is this the kind of person that should be allowed to be in Congress in America? This is someone who hates America. And we're finding out here. I mean, it just makes my mind like blown, right? Like, why is she a congressperson in America? How? Well, all these NGOs and USAID money went to Kenya, took them to Kenya, paid for them to go as refugees to Kenya. All those NGOs knew, the CIA, the NGOs, everybody involved, the US military, they all knew this colonel's status. Part of the military machinery. Okay, so the role of colonel under Siad Barre. Dictator Mohammed Siad Barre ruled Somalia through a tightly controlled military regime. A colonel in the Somali National Army was not a low-level conscript. It was a senior command position responsible for executing state-directed strategies, deploying troops, and maintaining regime control. The Isaac genocide. Huh. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Wonder if that's any connection. The Isaac genocide. I wonder if that's Christian, Judeo-Christian. Somehow connected. I don't know. The Isaac genocide between 1987 and 1990, the Barre regime carried out a systematic campaign against the Isaac clan in northern Somalia, modern-day Somaliland. This campaign included aerial bombing major cities like Hargeisa, mass summary executions. Mass summary executions. That means without trial, y'all. And intentional cutting off of food and water lines. This systematic destruction of agricultural infrastructure directly laid the groundwork for the catastrophic famines of the early 90s. All those famines that you saw on TV about Somalia was created by this guy and her father. That Christian groups were, barraged by, I saw them growing up on TV. Begging for donations to help these starving children in Somalia. And it was because of this regime. Well, what was their political affiliation? What was it? What were they getting rid of communism or some really extreme Islamic groups or something? Let's find out. The debate on his background. Critics of Somaliland have highlighted that his long military career, which included leading a regiment in the late 70s and remaining an active officer until the government's collapse in 1991, means he served the regime during its most violent periods. Without guilt or remorse, apparently. No empathy. Maybe that's why Ilhan acts as she does. She learned it from her father. She didn't have a mother. Her mother died, so she was raised by her father in the United States. And whoever else babysat her. Wow. The complex link because of the history, there's a sharp divide in how his legacy is viewed. The critic perspective. Many historians, political opponents, blah, blah, blah. They contend that any senior officer who remained loyal during a campaign that killed between 50,000 and 200,000 civilians was inherently complicit in enabling those atrocities. Oh, he carried them out. He ordered it. Legally, unlike any high-ranking bar officials who face U.S. federal lawsuits or deportation for specific documented acts of torture, such as General Samatar or Colonel Abdi Ali, Nur Omar Muhammad was never formally charged with a specific war crime before his death. Well, I wonder why. Obviously, he was being used because it traveled. All the money, all the military, all the U.S. forces, and all the U.S. entities involved was pulled out. Well, most of the NGOs involved, okay, because humanitarian aid kept flowing to Somalia, right? But all the military and everything was pulled out, and USAID was pulled out to go to Kenya with these people as quote unquote refugees. So they gave these people specifically refugee status. Why? Well, because they're assets. I mean, that's the only logical conclusion. What else is there? Why else is there? Why else is there? He killed 50,000 to 200,000 civilians. He's directly complicit. Why those other ones were charged and deported, but she hasn't been deported yet. Hang on, I'm going to get to that in a second about marriage to her brother and stuff. Well, I asked that question here in a minute too. Therefore, while direct personal culpability remains a subject of intense historical debate, it is factual certainty that he was a senior commander within the very military regime that devastated Somalia and triggered the humanitarian crisis. So he's a murderer. And the reason she acts like she does with complete lack of any moral compass, any remorse, any guilt, any empathy for what she does, the crimes that she commits, stealing, theft, nodding, looking the other way, of all the millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions or even billion has been thrown out there in the media. Dollar fraud aligned with the AG and Walls. It's all tied together, to it now. It's all been outed. Maybe that's why she acts like she does. When Lindell TV reporter, that redheaded girl, tries to get any information out of her, and she treats her like she does, with such disdain, hate, contempt, and apathy. Because when you don't have empathy, you have the neural networks linked up to apathy. You know that they're two opposing forces. You should have both, some of both. And it should be governed by a mediating neural network, to switch on and off when you should have empathy and when you should have apathy. You should have apathy for people trying to steal and abuse and harm you, so that you can protect and defend yourself, right? But you should have empathy for people who are humans like you and are being harmed by people who shouldn't be harming them. You should have empathy for that. But Ilhan Omar displays none of that. It's the exact opposite. She displays apathy for the people that she should have empathy for because she has no empathy. These people are... The lack of empathy starts with severe depression, the spectrum of mental health disorders that go from, let's say like level 1, severe depression, which can lead to suicide, right? So it could lead to murder of yourself. And actually, severe depression can lead to murder of others too, because many women who have severe depression murder their own children. This is criminal cases all over the place, okay? But, or fathers murder their whole families. They lack empathy and compassion for others. But that's just the start. I mean, no, you go down the spectrum to other mental health problems, oppositional defiance, narcissism, and then you go into psychopathy, sociopathy, then you go into clusters, then you go into stuff like dark triad, and maybe there's worse. I don't know if dark triad's the end of the spectrum. It's the ultimate evil, okay? Anyway, I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I'm saying that lack of empathy is a very dark end of the mental health spectrum, okay? It's not low IQ. These people can have very high IQs to do evil. They're wired to do evil because they lack empathy and they lack impulse control. All right. Anyway, legal reality, blah, blah, blah. So this is her father. He's one of those people with that kind of mental wiring. And the daughter exhibits the same kind of apathy and contempt for U.S. citizens. All right. Don't look at that. That's an AI picture, okay? So AI photo, the Sahan Journal, XXX, Israel Hayam. Well, that's legit. So we've already seen that media. That's legit. Wikipedia. American Spectator, legit. CBC, legit. Some of these X sources. Those X sources, they might be legit. I don't know. It's just X.com. Pulitzer. What the? Human Rights Watch, that's legit. Combating Terrorism Center, I mean, I assume that's legit too. But so Bar and Nur Omar were Muslim. Those regions they attacked were Christians. No, both sides of conflict were Muslim. And the only reason I asked were Christians is because there's so many Christian charities. While I was growing up, that I saw on TV trying to get money to go to these Somalis. So why would they need to if all that USAID and humanitarian aid was going to all those NGOs and UN organizations is all feeding them? And because as I saw above, as we saw a few minutes ago, all of that's corrupt. All right. This is very long. Maybe I should pause this right here. And then both sides were conflict were Muslim because this is so important and I don't want to lose it. I'm going to hit pause. There's going to be a part 2. We're going to stop here. There's going to be a part 2. Come back and watch the second part.